I wonder how observant you are. I wonder how good you are at looking really carefully at and listening really carefully to things and noticing the details in them. Well, I'm going to give you a test. I'm going to show you a picture and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. Now, this is one of my favourite books. It's called Egg Day. And Hetty the hen gives all of the animals on the farm an egg to decorate for the best egg competition. So look at it carefully. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to look at it, and then I'm going to ask you some things about it afterwards. Okay, here's the first question. What was the colour of the horse's mane? Well done if you said black. Which two eggs were decorated with curly bits? Well, it was the pig's egg and the goat's egg. That's right. And the third and final question, what were the colour of the spots on the hen's egg? They were brown. Well done if you said that. I wonder how you did. I wonder if you got all of those questions right because you noticed them. You were looking really carefully. Well, we've done this little game because in the part of the Bible we're going to look at in just a moment, Jesus was still in the temple courts teaching all those different groups of people different things when he looked really carefully at something and then used it to teach his disciples something. And this happened on the days in between the Monday of Holy Week, when Jesus cleared the temple, and the Thursday of Holy Week, when Jesus had his Last Supper with his disciples, the same part of Holy Week that we're in ourselves now. This time I want you to listen really carefully and see what you notice, because again I'm going to ask you a few questions afterwards to see how much you've noticed about just these few verses that we find in the Bible in the book of Mark, and it's chapter 12 and verses 41 to 44. This is what it says. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Now the offering was the money that people gave as part of their worship to God, and the temple treasury was the place where they put that money. Many rich people threw in large amounts. But a poor widow, that's the word we use for a lady who has been married but her husband has died, a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a fraction of a penny. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, that means that she was very poor, put in everything, all she had to live on. How did you get on? Let's find out. Here's the first question. What was Jesus doing when he saw the people putting the money into the temple treasury? That's right, he was sitting down, wasn't he? It was like he wanted to have a really good look at what was going on around him. He didn't just happen to notice this while he was doing something else. He sat down and he was carefully watching. Here's the second question. It's in 2 parts. What words were used to describe the amount of money the rich people were putting in? And what is the word that was used to describe how they were getting it into the temple treasury? Well, they were throwing in large amounts, weren't they? Listen again. Many rich people threw in large amounts. Now, maybe those rich people were trying to impress others by the large amounts they were putting in. But Jesus himself wasn't impressed, was he? When he talked to the disciples afterwards, this is what he said. They all gave of their wealth, Now, wealth is another word for riches. And Jesus knew that these people, although they were putting lots of money into the temple treasury, he knew they still had lots of money left at home for themselves. What they were giving to God on that day was a bit like spare money they had that they didn't need anymore. But because they still had plenty at home or in the bank. And the fact that they threw it into the temple treasury maybe suggests that they didn't care at all about this money. It didn't really mean anything to them. And finally, how much money did the widow give to God? And what word was used to describe how she got her money into the temple treasury? Well, she just used 2 small copper coins, didn't she? And she put them in. Now, these 2 small copper coins would have been worth less than a penny, so they would have only been worth a tiny amount. But Jesus knew that this widow was poor, and this money really meant something to her. The fact that she put her money into the treasury rather than threw it in like the rich people did suggests that she did this carefully and thoughtfully, and shows that this was really valuable to her, because this wasn't spare leftover money that she had. This was all she had to live on. Yet here she was, giving it to God to show how much she loved him. And this is what Jesus was talking about when he said this: "This poor widow has put more into the temple treasury than all the others." Because this woman was willing to give all she had to God. And this is a really good example of the things we've been thinking about in Easter in Miniature Bite-Size over the last couple of days, isn't it? We've been thinking about how God wants to be and deserves to be the most important thing in our lives. And we've also been thinking about how Jesus told that teacher of the law that the greatest commandment is to love God with every part of us, with our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. And this is exactly what this woman was doing. She was loving God with every part of her, with everything she had. When Jesus sat down and watched this woman, he didn't just see what she was doing on the outside, but he saw right into her heart and knew why she was doing it. And that reminds me of a verse in the Old Testament that I thought we could learn as a memory verse today. 1 Samuel in chapter 16 verse 7 says this: "The Lord does not look at the things that man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Now those words will come up on the screen in a minute. And each time the screen changes, pause it for a moment and read through those words a few times. And in the later screens, you'll have to fill in some of the missing words. You can make up a few actions too, if you like, to help you remember what the words say. And then challenge yourself by seeing if you can remember it every day from now until Easter Sunday.